Okay. So we may continue. The first thing I want to show you is just what happens when we have a delay. Okay, so I say that I need more time to convert the async function with a real promise in order to be able to return some data from a callback. Okay. So this is the same fake function as before, but with a 1 second delay. And what happens in the application is simply that when I load the application, the first time it's rendered with an empty list, and then after a while, of course, the state is updated and the list is. It's a bit inconvenient for the users when we have a page that says, okay, there's something here, but really there's nothing there. So in many cases, we will come to that. When we take into account that some operation can have a delay, and all network operations could have a delay, to insert some loading or spinner or some indication that something is happening and the user should wait for a bit. Okay, so again, when this becomes synchronous, we will have one state in which the data is not available yet, and so we want to decide what to render in that case. Do we just render blank information, or do we render some messages like loading or some animation with a spinner or some that, so that the user knows that they are loaded? So we need some more extra information about the state of the asynchronous operation, whether it started, it's ongoing, or it's completed. It's an extra complexity that we'll see basically next week, how to put everything together. Okay, right now what we are trying to do is actually to do the real one. Right now we only did fake ones. So from the app point of view, nothing should change, but right now I'm writing a function that will call the real API. As I mentioned, I have a server that we developed in the last weeks. So I want to spin it up. So usually what I do is to have two terminals, not at this resolution, but where one terminal right goes to the server. Okay, so I'm the server and I run the server on its own port. So actually I have two terminals, one in which the React app is running and the other in which the server is running. What we are doing is a setup like this. Let me show you a picture. When we have a simple React client, we are spinning up the development server from Vite, and we have the server that is serving all the components through the React development server. This component go to the browser, the blue one is the browser, and run there inside the client. We now want this component to be able to do a fetch call, okay? To where? To a server that we run, and that has all the routes for get and post API calls already defined, okay? We have this application here. So inside the React application, we have a fetch call that will go to a different server. Actually, we have two servers running, one which is needed in development mode, at least in development mode, for serving the React components and doing all the live update and so on, and the other for hosting the API calls. We decide, so one is the npm run dev from React, and the other is the node server.js from Express. It's an extra application. We decide to have two different servers. Why? Well, because it's complex to join them. In particular, could we host the APIs on the React server? No, because the React development server is a closed system. You cannot add your own routes or your own middlewares and so on. No, it's just very optimized just to serve, and it only works in development mode. And at the same time, we cannot run React components in Express because it doesn't know anything. One thing we could do is to deploy the React application as a set of static files and host those static files into the server, like when we are really deploying and publishing that. But then we'll complicate much the development cycle, because every time we change something, we must deploy the application, build the final JavaScript, copy it to the server, and so on. So we are stuck with, in development mode at least, with these two servers. It's not a big issue. We just need to remember that there are two real separate applications. One is the API server that runs on a given machine, on a given port, and the other is just a React application. And they communicate, of course, through HTTP calls. So that's why I'm running the API server. It was set up to run in port 3001, and the React application instead is running in port 5173 as usual. Let's just make a test. We already had the test HTTP files. We want to call this API. Okay, remember test HTTP, we used it for testing the API calls, and it will return something like this. Okay, this is something from week number 4, something like that, that we already had ready. Now we want to call, so we already had everything, we can debug it separately. Now we want to put it into the API. So actually what we want to do is here to do a fetch to the URL, which is this one. Where is the I? Here. So the first argument is the URL. We need to do a get without any special headers, so we don't need the extra configuration object as a second argument. We don't need a second argument in fetch. And now we just have to, async. We just have to extract the JSON of the question from the response. So we have the response, await fetch, and then we can extract the data or the questions, await response.json. We are not doing any error checking here, so we are being extremely optimistic. Do we need, no, could we just return questions here? Maybe yes or no, because right now this is just objects recreated from the JSON. Okay, maybe we want to have real question objects, so creating new objects, so we need to map this list. But for a moment, let's see what happens here. Okay, let's put a console.log here to see what we just download. Okay. Okay, if I save this and I rerun the application, sorry, I need to modify the name of the functions that this one is called. Okay, you see that these are actually changed because they're being downloaded from the server. And so on. So actually, you can see that by enabling the network panel. I always have it open when I debug in client-server applications. You see that, let's make it larger. It's difficult to fit everything at this resolution. You see that we have some network call questions. So there was a get API questions that return a status OK, and the request was empty, but the response contained this JSON file that contains actually these two objects. We don't have any methods defining these objects or rebuilding the objects themselves. They are of type object, they are not of type question, but the name of the property matches, so the application didn't care too much. So now we are actually closing the loop, you see. The data is coming, the data about the question is not coming from fake variables, but is coming from the server itself. And the server, we had enabled the logging. You see that the server is receiving this set of calls time over time. Sometimes it returns with a 200, sometimes it returns with a 3804, which means that the response is already cached. So the server Express is able to check that the response that I'm giving the server received the HTTP request, okay? Computes the response and is about to send the response back. And may realize that this response is identical to the one that it just gave some time ago, a little time ago. So instead of replying with a copy of the same answer, it will just tell to the browser, you already have that. So check in your cache. It didn't change. So it will say one transfer of the request body. So, but this is something that is built in inside the Express that tries not to replicate the same answers when it knows that the same browser already has that information in cache. Okay? So that's why sometimes we see 304 when we are repeatedly doing the same calls. Of course, it cannot happen if we are doing a post or if some data is changing. This is a simple case in which, sorry, let me open the server. Did we talk about cores yet? No, probably. So this is running because there's this instruction in the server that I need to explain to you right now. If I didn't have this, okay, this would fail with an error called cross-origin request blocked. CORS means cross-origin request policy or something like that. And it's a pain. It's a security measure built inside the browsers that limit, in a way, the type of fetch calls that the browser can do. So we didn't have to discuss any of this when doing calls from the command line or from Visual Studio Code, because they don't care. They just do the call. The browsers have a security model inside, and the security model prevents a browser from doing an HTTP call to a server that is different from the one from which the JavaScript came. So the problem is in this picture that we saw before. The JavaScript is coming from this server, but the HTTP call goes to another server. It's a cross-origin request. I'm requesting something from a server which is not my origin. Origin means the server from which the JavaScript running fetch has been originated, has been served originally. And the browser is blocking that. Unless the second server explicitly authorizes the code with the origin from my first server, the request is blocked. So actually, when you are visiting one website, you are downloading the JavaScript. This JavaScript, by default, can only do fetch calls to the same server from which the JavaScript was originally served. If the JavaScript code tries to do other calls to other servers, the browser stops that, unless the other server allows that. The other server is open, say, okay, I'm accepting requests from the various origins. They may be open, and so I accept requests from everybody, or I can only decide from which origins I want to accept those requests. So it's an automatic protection mechanism inside the browsers that will block the request unless the server allows it, with some policies. So the server can implement some policies, and in the case of Express, otherwise that, no, it's not in this, sorry, it's in the other file. Yeah. So yeah. The model is this one. We have our browser that runs some JavaScript code that is coming from this server, but needs to do some calls to another server. Course is blocking that. It's a strange thing because it's a protection inside the browser, but it's configured inside the server. The idea, of course, is that the browser will ask for permission. Okay? The browser asks to the server for permission to make a given call. And the server will respond in two different ways. If the request is a GET, let's see the network. If the request was a GET, sorry, let's run it again so that we have the response. Okay. If the request is a GET, response body is not available to script because the reason course missing allow origin. So actually, it's strange enough, the response was given, but the browser cannot access it, cannot read that. Okay, because the response doesn't explicitly say that this response can be used, doesn't allow it. This, of course, it's a security model that is effective for well-behaved browsers. Okay, if you're writing your own script, you can call everything and then get the results. So it's just it's not a strong security, because if you have a browser that will and you modify the source code of Firefox, for example, and will drop this kind of controls, the data is there. Okay. So in the case of a GET, actually the GET is executed by the server, and the server doesn't add the specific header saying course allow, and so the browser prevents the JavaScript code from seeing the result, in the case of a GET. In the case of a POST, it's more complex, because a GET, we said, is idempotent. If I do it or if I don't do it, the data doesn't change. So we can try it, and if the data comes back with the authorization, I will use it. Otherwise, I just wasted some time. With a POST, it's more dangerous. I cannot just do a POST and then see whether the server will allow it. Okay. So the idea is that for methods that change the data, like post and put, the browser actually, in the course model, does, when you are making a fetch post, a post call with the fetch API, the browser will first make an empty request asking, if I will do a post on this address, will it go through or will it be blocked by calls? It's called the pre-flight check. So before doing the real call, you will see a small call with a header, just with a head method, saying, okay, will you allow me if I do this call? And then the server will say yes or not, and according to that, the browser will do or not the post. So it's a lot of data exchange that happens automatically between the client and the server by setting the right headers. To make it short, actually, we need to set the policy inside Express about who or which service we want to call us. So if I'm doing an application and I'm building my own API server, maybe I want only my application to call my methods, my backend. Or if I'm building a public access API server, I want everybody to access. So the course configuration shows or lists the origins from which we accept calls. In development mode, we just can use this middleware and say, okay, let's accept everything, okay, from everybody. And it's an empty configuration. We're saying, okay, allowing everybody. We will need to modify this in 3 weeks when we add authentication, because authenticated requests require special headers. So the short solution is this one, but just remember, it's not, we are, actually neutralizing the protection that CORS gives us, okay? So for production, it shouldn't be a good configuration. So in practice, for let it work, in development mode, we open the doors, basically, and if we redo the check, we see that this question comes true, and if we see more details in the headers, we see that the response has a new header that has been added called access control allow origin asterisk. So every origin is allowed to call my server. You have a question?
I'm not sure to understand. We put the app.use course in the API, but the JavaScript comes from the React server.
Yes.
So why do we not?
Yeah. So let me. It's illogical. Yeah. Let me go back to this code, to this picture, okay? So we are here inside this fetch that is doing this call. But actually the browser is doing the call. So the browser wants to ensure that this JavaScript calls only allowed origins, allowed servers, let's say. So it makes the call to this API server because it doesn't know whether this API server will allow me or not. It makes a call to the API server by saying, okay, I have some JavaScript code that comes from here. I'm coming from here, I want to call this API, this endpoint. So the server, with its own logic, with its own policies, will check the origin from which the fetch is coming, which is the name of this server, and compare it with its own policies. And it will say, okay, I will allow you or not. And if it allows, then the response goes through and the browser allows that. So it's actually the server receiving the API that will decide which are the origins from which it will accept calls. Okay? We cannot set it in the server because otherwise I would create my own application and I can decide which API server I could call. No. It's the authorization should come from the owner of the resource, so from the API server. Basically, it's a very crude mechanism because it filters according to the URL. Okay, If you are building an API server to be used by many people, probably you will accept from anybody and then have your own authentication mechanism to say, okay, did you pay? Do you have an API key? Are you logged in? And so on. And this is what we had. So this comes into play every time if I had to call it, the same server, it would run without problems. Okay, so let's just be aware of that. And now, so we got rid of the fake questions. Now the real questions are coming from the server, right? We initialize them empty. At the mount of the component, we are calling this API that will set the state after that. If the request is low, then there may be some time where the page is empty. Right now, it's actually quite fast. It's difficult to notice. There's a small time in which this list is empty. But in case of more complex query, it will show something here. So what are we missing? We are missing the error handling here. We are missing the, let's say, loading state, the intermediate loading state. And we are asking ourselves whether this method of loading everything into app is the right method to do or not. Because, for example, let's start from this one, which is more the application issue. Then we'll sort out all the details about error handling. And should I do the same? The question is, should I do the same for the answers? Right now in our application we have a set of fake answers that are the fake answers to one question. In fact, if I'm playing with the application, I go to the first one, I have some answers. I go to the second one, the same are displayed. Actually, every list of answers is specific to a given question. So we have a choice here. Do we load all the answers for all the questions right here in the home page? Because when we click on the first or the second or third question, we should go there. We should the component should know the list. Okay? When we are passing this data here to the list, when we are rendering the component with the answers display, we are going to provide answers. So if the ownership of the answers state is in app, then app should know the answer for every question. All the answers from every question. It may be too much. So in this case, if we think that it's too much, we don't want to load everything at the beginning, then we should shift down the answer state to some lower component. And every, for example, answers display component will load its own list of answers only for the question that was involved in. Yes?
Can we also say that at the beginning answer is empty, and then when we click, we use effect and we charge the answer corresponding to the question?
Yes. So when I click on a, but what happens when I click here? I'm navigating. Okay, I'm changing the URL. Navigating is just changing a state. The change of this state should trigger the loading of the answers. So where should I do this? Okay, One possibility could be to register an event handler on this click. So when I click here, I will load the answers, and only after the answers are being loaded, I will render the second component. It would be difficult because in the same time I need to block the interface to prevent the user from clicking anywhere until all the loading has been completed. The alternative is just, let's go to the child component and let the child component think about its own state. So I click, I got here, I give to the child component the number of the question, and it will load everything else it needs. If we see the application, we see that the answers state is only used here. So check answers is only used in this component. So it can also go down to that component. The issue is always there. Where is the right place to place the right component in which to store a state variable? It should be a component high enough so that all the children that need this value are children of this component, but low enough so that we don't load everything at once at the beginning. Maybe this means that in some cases we need to reconfigure or refactor our application, our set of components, because maybe we want to create one component that stores the data. At the beginning, when we talked about React components, we say that there may be display components that handle a part of user interaction and data components. Components that maybe store some data, don't render anything, but manages the state. So we could also, if we want, we can put everything into answer display. Otherwise, we could have an intermediate component that loads the data and then calls answer display to render it. It's up to us how to organize that. The issue here is that I don't want all the answers to be loaded at the same time. It means that answer display should, instead of just relying on these prop.answers, should load them on its own with the same method. So we are moving the state answers, let's say if it breaks something. Where is that? So we imagine of moving the state answers from the app component to the answer display component. Of course, we initialize it as an empty. And this actually becomes easy because instead of props.answers, we just use the state answers. And then we care about how to update it. So answers, instead of prop.answers, we just have answers.length. Instead of, okay, just a shortcut, but let's minimize the modifications. Okay, right now, of course, it's empty because we have an empty state. But the next step could be to load from this state. And the idea is that in this case we have a load answers, async function load answers. That in this case it receives a parameter which is the question ID. And it does something like the same as before. So await, fetch, maybe we can set a constant up there. So that we don't type many times the same URI. So URI plus. Do we have an endpoint for the list of answers? Yes. If we go to test.http, we add API questions, question number, / answers. That give us the list of answers to that question. So this is the API to call. Well, of course, 2 is not a number, but is the question ID. So let's make it a template string, question ID. And we are doing the same. Const answers, await response.json, return answers. Okay, we go right now into the answers, and we set up the loading. Question ID is here, and so we can add a use effect where the callback function would load the answers and set the state, and we need to run it at startup time and whenever the question ID changes. So we need to add an argument here. In the way we are using it, it should not probably change. Because for changing the question ID, we need to go back to the home page and then call another component, so the component will be recreated. But imagine if you have maybe 2 arrows in the list of answers. Okay, next question, previous question. Then we are just changing the question ID inside the same component. If the question ID changes, we need to reload the set of answers because they need to be updated. Whenever the question ID changes, for any reason, the question list is invalidated and should be reloaded. And we see it because inside this, we have load answers. Sorry, I need to export that. Yes, and I need to import it from there. With the question ID. And we take the answers and we use them for setting the state. Set answers ans. Okay, so let's see what happens. There's some problem, of course, because in app we are still referencing app. We did more image to app because in app we were assuming that we had the control of all the answers. So all these functions don't work anymore. So let's put them out of the way. And also the component answer display couldn't have any of these. Add answer is not defined. Apt 105. Okay, the same is here. And the same is there. Okay, we are more or less here. Let's see if I click on the first one. So the API loaded questions, and we see them. If I click on the first one, yeah, the problem is that these objects are not the JS. So what I see is that the answers has been called, and the response has been given with the answers to that specific question. 0, 1, 2. But in displaying, we call the date.format. The problem is that this date field is a string, is not a date.js object. Because these are just plain objects. Actually, we were lazy, and we just, in the API, returned the object as they came from the wire, from the connection. Actually, we should at least convert them into real answer objects, okay? And it's boring, sorry, but any answer should be replaced by a new answer object with its parameters, a.id, a.text, a.email. What do we have here? ID, text, email. We don't have the user ID, no. No, sorry. ID, text, comma, email, and then the date, and the score, a.score. I always forget. Yes, you see that the constructor for answer is converting the string to the JS object. So we are doing all this just to call this conversion. Okay, let's try to save it and do it again. Okay, now it shows. Because, of course, the answers are still raw objects, but then the return value of the, if I go inspecting the React side, and I check the answers display object, we see that the state now contains 3 answer objects. And they're not just objects, they are answer. So we have an API that with the rest of the components talks with objects. It receives objects as arguments and returns objects as arguments. On the server side, it will talk JSON, strings and JSON objects. And it's the role of the API to do all the mappings and the conversions so that the actual React components always have objects with the proper data, with the proper type. Especially in this case, especially where there are some attributes which are complex attributes. Okay, this was, so, and sorry, if I go back to question number 2, you see that the list of answers is different. And if I had to change it here, without, of course, it's a problem because we have a loading problem, an order of loading. So actually, the robustness of the application, in this case, when different parts of data are loaded in different pages, becomes an issue. From the goal of this course, okay, just to tell you, in the exam, in the evaluation, we will only navigate through the application, okay? So we are not asking to develop an application that will work even if I change the URL or do some strange moves. So in a real world application, there's also all cases that we should manage when you are jumping to a page and I didn't go first through the data page, so I don't have the data and so on. In our case, there's already enough complexity to handle, so we are not considering that case. Okay, so we know that if the application is reloaded on a different page, it may not behave well, okay, but it's not part of what we are asking you to at the exam. Okay, now we only have remember, we still have the error handling and the delays to manage, but I want first to play with the functional level. Now, of course, all the actions don't work anymore. We commented them out, by the way. Because each of these actions should be now implemented by calling an API, a remote API. So, for example, the upvote link, which was the easiest one, right? Now should go and increase the score on the server, on the database. We had an API for voting. Was this one? API answer ID/vote with this body. So right now, when a user clicks on the button, they should call this API. So we need inside API, add another function, upvote, with an answer ID. And in this case, it means making a post call. So it would be a const response fetch. The URI is, in this case, sorry, I've lost it, answers ID vote. And this is the question ID, sorry, the answer ID, right? And I need to make a post call. So I have an object with the further details for this request. The first one would be the method that I want to be post. The second, I should add the header for telling the server that the body that I'm sending with the post request contains a JSON. So it's something like headers. It's an object that will contain content type application plus JSON. Sorry. It's not equal this column because there are object properties. And then I have the real body of the request, of the request, so comma body. That should be a string, a JSON, containing the JSON representation of the object that we want to provide. So the object was this one, vote. Sorry, what was the example again? Upvote. And so we are converting JSON.stringify this body object. I could have put a string there, but in general we are taking the information from some object that we are somewhere. So this should be the call yeah, it's I wanted to check no. No, I'm just playing with the HTTP extension that it can generate the code for us, and it was just checking if method header, content type, body, yes, it seems correct. Okay, you can have the REST client generate some code for you. Okay, so what happens if we call this? Remember that this is an asynchronous function that returns a promise, so we should return some value. The value could be returned. We don't have any value to return, actually. So we need to await the response, and then there should be all the error checking here. Maybe we just return a value just to unlock the dem method. So this upvote is something that we should link to the upvote button in the actions. We go down, so we go now to the button. Remember that we had some answer row with all the data, and we have this upvote property that right now was using the fake method in the main. We just replace this with a real function, upvote, that I need to define here. Now the state is in this component, so the function for managing the component should be here. So I define the answers, I loaded the initial value, and now I define the method for const upvote is a function that takes, what does it take? Probably, I don't remember. Let's copy from what they had in just the ID, probably. Upvote. Just the ID, right. So I'm doing the same here. I'm checking the ID of a question, of an answer, and I call the asynchronous function. There's no need of a use effect here. We are just an event handler. An event handler can normally call a synchronous function. Event handlers run in the, or they already run in the commit phase, not in the render phase. So we don't need to create an extra effect. Any event handler can call API functions. The problem is calling API functions from other cases that we need to put them into some effect. So in this case, we should just call upvote from API. Let's call it, it's called upvote. We should do upvote, say. Let's change the name so that we don't have a clash. So we import upvote from the API with this ID, and it should be enough. We don't need to wait for the response. So let's see what is happening here. So let me load the application for the beginning. Go here. I have a question that is 0. Let's see in the network what is happening. Okay. Something happened. I clicked here. I see in the network panel a post that contained the request vote upvote. There was no response. We are not expecting any response in this case. In fact, the response was positive, 200. We also see another call here, options. As I said, we are doing a post, so for checking the course, this is the other call that the browser is doing. Actually, it's displaying them in different order, but the options comes first and then the post. Okay. So it's not something due to our application, but it's something that the browser does by itself. What is happening is that the 0 remains 0. Did it? So let me go back and return here. Actually, it became -1 for some reason. If I click on upvote many times about this question, it becomes -8 and so on. So there's something wrong because the vote is going down instead of up. And this is something in the implementation of the server API for some reason. But actually the data, we are doing the post calls, the server is updating, but we are not seeing the result here. Of course, because we are changing the state on the server, but nothing tells the React application that the local state should be refreshed too. And the answer state is no longer valid after I do an upvote, because these answers will be different. The new answer will be different because some of them has a different vote. What could I do? Well, there's an easy thing to do to reload everything. Okay? So we could do, okay, we wait, of course we need to wait for the post to complete, and then we reload the answers. Of course, we need to, this should be asynchronous. So I'm increasing the vote, and when the operation is finished, so the server returned the answer, the API returned true, a stupid value, but just to tell me that something returns, I unlock the await, and then I call load answers that reloads everything. So in this case, you see that when I click here, the number really decreases instead of increases. Okay, we will fix that. But we see the change immediately. We know that we are changing just a number, but we are reloading all the list of answers. That could be a problem in our understanding of the performance, because we are loading everything when we know. We expect only one number to have changed. So there's a lot of optimization to do here. Okay, this is the safest way. I change everything, so I throw away what I know and I ask the server again for the fresh information. Otherwise, I could have tried to optimize something. Okay, I call upvote, and then I can update the state internally. So I'm asking the server, increase this vote, and I locally also increase this vote. We already have the method for doing that. It was enough before. We know how to do that. So I'm patching the local data by replicating the modification that I just asked to the server, which is more optimized, but also more dangerous. Because what if the server operation failed? What if the operation gave a different result, because maybe there's some logic I don't know how to replicate or something like that. So there are a lot of decisions to take whether it should be optimistic, saying, okay, I click on decrease, so I decrease the local state, and I also tell the server decrease yours or increase yours. Or pessimistic, I modify something, I may have modified something because maybe the browser sets a limit about the number of votes or whatever, and so just to be sure, I reload everything. This all it works is the more conservative way, also the less efficient way. And we should also check, find in the intermediate way. So this, the basics are here. Use effect and fetch plus course, okay, are the basic ingredients. But how do you use them in the cases where there may be delays, there may be network errors, there may be overlapping operations. Like, what if I have two different people that are connecting to the same server and they are both voting the same question, the same answer? How do I know that somebody else is increasing the number, and so on? Okay, so this is the topic for next week, where we go deeper in the different advanced patterns of usage. Let me just fix this bug, but because I cannot see it. Answer, vote for an answer. Up vote.
Sir?
Yep.
It was because when you wrote upvote, you wrote upvote space and not upvote in the React part, in API.js. If you go up, it's upvote space.
Ah, it would take me 12 years probably. Okay. Yeah, thank you. Okay, so there's a lot to unpack, and the next time we'll find the more difficult cases. Okay, so if there are any questions, otherwise I think it's all for today. Thank you.